When flight attendant Karen Mitchell slapped a casually dressed black woman in first class, she had no idea she'd just assaulted Alexandra Pierce, the self-made billionaire who owned the entire airline. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The first-class cabin of Atlantic Airways Flight 237 hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked every departure from New York to London. Flight attendant Karen Mitchell moved through the cabin with practiced precision, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that matched her rigid demeanor. She'd been with Atlantic Airways for 15 years, and first class was her domain. She prided herself on knowing the frequent flyers, the executives, the celebrities, and the wealthy regulars who expected nothing but perfection. As passengers settled in, Karen's eyes narrowed at the sight of a young black woman in seat 1A, the best seat on the plane. The woman wore simple jeans, white sneakers, and an oversized hoodie, her natural hair styled in neat box braids. No designer logos, no expensive watch, nothing that signaled to Karen that she belonged in first class. The woman was absorbed in reading something on her tablet, barely looking up as passengers filed past. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I believe you may be in the wrong seat. This is first class." She emphasized the last two words as if explaining a difficult concept to a child. Alexandra Pierce looked up from her tablet, her expression calm but tired. At 34, she had grown accustomed to these interactions, even as the CEO of Pierce Global Innovations and one of the wealthiest self-made billionaires in America. "I'm in the correct seat," she replied simply, offering her boarding pass. Karen barely glanced at it. "There must be some mistake. These seats are very expensive." Her tone made it clear what she was implying. "There's no mistake," Alexandra said firmly but politely. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do before takeoff." Karen's face flushed red. In 15 years, no one had dismissed her like this. "I'm going to need to see some ID," she demanded, loud enough that nearby passengers began to stare. Alexandra sighed, reaching into her bag to retrieve her passport and company ID. As she did, another passenger bumped past, accidentally causing Alexandra to drop her items. When she bent to pick them up, Karen impatiently reached down at the same time, causing their heads to collide. "Watch it!" Karen snapped, losing her professional demeanor entirely. "I apologize," Alexandra said, rubbing her forehead. "That was an accident." By now, the confrontation had drawn the attention of other passengers and crew members. The head, flight attendant Marcus, approached quickly, sensing trouble. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes moving between Karen and Alexandra. Before Alexandra could respond, Karen interjected. "This woman refuses to verify she belongs in first class, and now she's being disruptive." Alexandra stood up, her full height impressive as she looked Karen directly in the eyes. "I've provided my boarding pass and was about to show ID when this unfortunate collision occurred. I don't appreciate the implication that I don't belong here." Karen, feeling her authority challenged in front of her colleagues and other passengers, made a fatal error in judgment. As Alexandra turned to retrieve her fallen ID from the floor, Karen grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't walk away when I'm speaking to you!" What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would later give conflicting accounts. Alexandra jerked her arm away in surprise, her hand accidentally brushing against Karen's face. Karen, misinterpreting this as an attack, reacted instinctively. She slapped Alexandra across the face. The cabin went silent. Marcus immediately stepped between them. "Karen, that's completely unacceptable. Step away right now." Karen stood frozen, horror slowly replacing anger as she realized what she had done. Several passengers had their phones out recording the incident. Alexandra touched her cheek, her expression one of disbelief rather than anger. "I want your full name and employee number," she said quietly. "Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "This is absolutely not how Atlantic Airways treats our passengers. Please allow me to—" He was interrupted by the captain, who had been alerted to the disturbance. "Is there a problem here?" "This flight attendant just assaulted a passenger," one witness called out. The captain's face paled. "Ma'am, I cannot apologize enough. We'll have security remove this employee immediately." "That won't be necessary," Alexandra said, her voice steady as she finally retrieved her ID and company badge. "I don't want to delay the flight." Karen's eyes widened as she caught sight of the ID. You're Alexandra Pierce?" The name was familiar to anyone in the airline industry. Pierce Global Innovations had acquired a controlling stake in Atlantic Airways 6 months ago, implementing sweeping improvements to employee benefits and customer service standards. "Yes," Alexandra replied simply. "And while I won't be leaving this flight, I'm afraid you will be." Within minutes, airline security had escorted Karen off the plane. The remaining crew apologized profusely to Alexandra, who handled the situation with remarkable composure. She requested only that the incident be documented properly and that Karen be given due process according to company policies, not immediately fired without investigation. As the flight took off an hour later, Marcus approached Alexandra's seat with a glass of champagne. "Ms. Pierce, on behalf of everyone at Atlantic Airways, I want to apologize again." Alexandra accepted the champagne with a small smile. "Thank you, Marcus. But what happened today isn't just about me. It happens to people who don't own the company, too. People who can't demand accountability." "What can we do better?" Marcus asked sincerely. Alexandra took a moment to consider. "When I bought this airline, I did it because I saw potential, not just for profit, but for creating an exemplary company that treats everyone with dignity. I think this incident highlights that we still have work to do on our training programs." Later that week, Karen sat nervously in a conference room at Atlantic Airways headquarters, expecting to be terminated. Instead, she found herself face with Alexandra Pierce again. "I'm not going to fire you," Alexandra said, taking a seat across from the stunned flight attendant. "That would be easy, but it wouldn't solve the larger problem." "I don't understand," Karen whispered, tears in her eyes. "What I did was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Alexandra agreed. "But rather than losing your job, I'm offering you a choice: resignation, or a position helping me develop a new company-wide training program on unconscious bias and conflict de-escalation. You made assumptions about me based solely on my appearance, and that led to a series of increasingly poor decisions. I think your experience could be valuable in teaching others what not to do." 6 months had passed since the incident that could have ended Karen Mitchell's career. Instead of finding herself unemployed and possibly unhireable in the industry she'd devoted 15 years to, she now sat in a sleek conference room at Atlantic Airways headquarters, reviewing the final draft of what would become the company's groundbreaking training program. The irony wasn't lost on her, that her worst professional moment had somehow led to the most meaningful work of her career. The door opened, and Alexandra Pierce entered, dressed in a simple but elegant black pantsuit. Unlike their first encounter, Karen no longer saw just a casually dressed black woman who didn't fit her narrow conception of first class. She saw the brilliant entrepreneur whose business acumen had revitalized a struggling airline, whose philanthropic efforts had funded STEM programs in underserved communities across the country, and whose quiet dignity in the face of humiliation had ultimately saved Karen's career. "How are we looking?" Alexandra asked, taking a seat across from Karen. She never stood on ceremony, preferring direct communication over hierarchical formalities. "We're ready," Karen replied, sliding the tablet. Across the table, "The curriculum has been vetted by the diversity consultants. The union representatives approved the implementation plan, and the pilot training sessions received overwhelmingly positive feedback." Alexandra reviewed the materials carefully. The program was comprehensive, covering everything from the psychology of unconscious bias to practical de-escalation techniques for high-stress situations. What made it unique, however, was its foundation in real experiences rather than theoretical scenarios. "I still don't understand why you didn't just fire me," Karen admitted, voicing the thought that had haunted her for months. "It would have been justified." Alexandra set the tablet down. "Firing you would have been easy," she said thoughtfully. "It would have given me personal satisfaction, perhaps. The videos would have gone viral. You would have become another Karen meme, and nothing would have actually changed." She leaned forward. The harder path was to transform that moment into something constructive, to address not just your actions, but the culture that tacitly permitted them. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. The first weeks after the incident had been excruciating for Karen. She'd faced the contempt of colleagues who'd witnessed her behavior, endured mandatory administrative leave while the company conducted its investigation, and battled her own shame and defensive instincts. When Alexandra had offered her the choice between resignation or helping develop the new training program, Karen had initially suspected it was a PR stunt or some elaborate form of public humiliation. "I remember thinking it was a trap," Karen confessed with a small, self-deprecating smile. "That you were setting me up to fail publicly as some form of justice." Alexandra nodded. "And I remember thinking you might not be capable of the self-reflection this role would require. We both had assumptions to overcome. The development of the training program had been a painstaking process of examination and accountability. Karen had been required to dissect her actions that day, identifying each assumption, each escalation point, each moment where a different choice could have led to a different outcome. She'd had to confront uncomfortable truths about her own biases, not just regarding race, but also about class, appearance, and authority. The hardest part, Karen reflected, was admitting that this wasn't an isolated incident. That day on the plane wasn't the first time I'd made assumptions about passengers based on how they looked. It was just the first time I faced consequences for it. The implementation phase had presented its own challenges. Some employees viewed the program skeptically, seeing it as corporate virtue signaling rather than a genuine commitment to change. Others resented having to participate in training that they felt didn't apply to them personally. Most difficult were those who saw Karen's continued employment as proof that the company wasn't serious about accountability. "People kept asking why I was still here," Karen said. "Like my presence undermined the entire program's credibility." "And what did you tell them?" Alexandra asked, though she knew the answer. "That I was the cautionary tale," Karen replied. "The living example of how quickly unconscious bias can escalate to overt discrimination, and how that discrimination can lead to actions that harm others and ultimately destroy careers." Over time, the skepticism had begun to fade as employees experienced the training firsthand. Unlike typical corporate diversity initiatives often criticized as superficial, this program didn't shy away from uncomfortable realities. It didn't present bias as a problem that could be solved in a day-long workshop, but acknowledged it as an ongoing challenge requiring continuous self-awareness and correction. What had made the program particularly effective was its practical approach. Rather than focusing exclusively on theoretical concepts, it provided concrete tools for employees to recognize their own biases in real time and strategies to prevent those biases from influencing their actions. It incorporated role-playing, scenarios based on actual incidents reported by passengers and crew members, creating a space where employees could practice responding appropriately to challenging situations. The training also emphasized accountability at all levels. Managers weren't exempt. In fact, they received additional training on how to model inclusive behavior and address problematic conduct among their teams. The company established clear reporting mechanisms for bias incidents and transparent processes for addressing them. The registration for the voluntary advanced modules is already at capacity, Karen noted, scrolling through the data. And the anonymous feedback surveys show that 87% of participants found the training highly valuable or transformative for their professional development. Alexandra nodded approvingly. And the customer satisfaction metrics? Up 23% overall since implementation began, Karen reported. With a 34% increase specifically in our diversity measures, the impact extended beyond numbers. There had been a palpable shift in the company culture. Crew members reported feeling more equipped to handle difficult situations without escalation. Passengers from diverse backgrounds shared experiences of feeling more welcome and respected. The airline's reputation had begun to recover from the initial hit it had taken when videos of the incident inevitably leaked online. "I received this yesterday," Alexandra said, retrieving an email on her phone. "It's from a black teenage girl who flew with us last week. She writes, 'For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to justify my presence in first class. No one questioned me. No one gave me those looks I'm used to getting. The crew treated me like I belonged there because I did.'" Karen felt tears welling in her eyes. One flight shouldn't feel revolutionary. "No," Alexandra agreed softly. "It shouldn't. But until it's not, we have work to do." The broader aviation industry had taken notice of Atlantic Airways' initiative. Initially, competitors had attempted to capitalize on the scandal, positioning themselves as more inclusive alternatives. But as Atlantic's approach began showing measurable results, not just in public perception but in employee retention, customer loyalty, and ultimately profitability, other airlines started reaching out about implementing similar programs. "The Attendant Airline Industry Association called again," Karen mentioned. "They want us to present the program framework at their annual conference." "Both of us?" Alexandra asked. Karen nodded. "They specifically requested that we share the story, the full story, of how the program came to be. They believe it adds credibility." Alexandra considered this. She had deliberately kept a low profile regarding the incident, focusing on structural changes rather than personal vindication. "What do you think? Are you ready to tell our story on that stage?" Karen took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. The idea of publicly admitting what I did, of being forever associated with that moment, it seemed unbearable. She paused. "But I've realized that the discomfort I feel talking about it is nothing compared to the discomfort so many people feel just existing in spaces where they're constantly judged as not belonging." Alexandra nodded in understanding. "It's not about either of us individually anymore. It's about the change we're trying to create." The conference presentation became just one of many platforms where they shared their story. What had begun as a crisis management effort evolved into a comprehensive initiative that positioned Atlantic Airways as an industry leader in inclusive customer service. The airline's new motto, "Everyone belongs in first class," became more than marketing. It embodied a philosophy that permeated every aspect of the company. Karen, once the embodiment of the problem, had become an unlikely but effective advocate for change. Her willingness to publicly own her mistakes and demonstrate genuine transformation lent authenticity to the program that no amount of corporate rhetoric could have achieved. She spoke candidly at industry events about the incident, not minimizing her actions or offering excuses, but illustrating how biases she hadn't even recognized had influenced her behavior with devastating consequences. Alexandra used her influence to ensure the program received the resources and institutional support it needed to succeed long-term. She made inclusive excellence a key performance indicator for executive bonuses and integrated bias prevention into every level of the company's operations, from hiring practices to service protocols. A year after the incident, Atlantic Airways won the prestigious Global Aviation Excellence Award for its training program. As Karen and Alexandra took the stage together to accept it, the audience, comprised of industry executives, crew members, and aviation professionals, rose in a standing ovation. This recognition isn't just for Atlantic Airways, Alexandra said in her acceptance speech. It's for every passenger who has ever felt unwelcome or unworthy because they didn't fit someone's preconception of who belongs where. It's for every employee who has had the courage to examine their own biases and commit to doing better. Karen stepped forward to the microphone, her voice steady despite her nerves. A year ago, I made a terrible mistake that should have ended my career. Instead, through Ms. Pierce's extraordinary grace and vision, it became an opportunity for growth, not just for me personally, but for our entire company and, hopefully, our industry. As they left the stage, a young flight attendant from another airline approached them. "Your program changed how I see my job," she told them. "Yesterday I caught myself making assumptions about a passenger based on their appearance, and I remembered your training. I stopped myself, reset my thinking, and approached them with genuine respect. It seems small, but it felt important." "It is important," Alexandra assured her. "Those small moments multiplied across thousands of interactions every day. That's how transformation happens." Later that evening, as they celebrated with the implementation team, Karen raised her glass in a toast. "To Alexandra Pierce," she said, "who taught me that true leadership isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about having the courage to transform them into opportunities for meaningful change." Alexandra raised her own glass in return. And to second. Chances, not given freely, but earned through accountability, reflection, and commitment to being better tomorrow than we were yesterday. The company continued to refine and expand its training program, exporting the model to other industries and organizations facing similar challenges. What had begun as one ugly moment between two women on an airplane had sparked a movement that gradually changed not just protocols and procedures, but hearts and minds. The transformation was ongoing, neither perfect nor complete, but undeniably real. In an industry and a world where people like Alexandra Pierce had too often been made to feel they didn't belong, Atlantic Airways had become a place where everyone truly did.